Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all of you to the sixth edition of Global Franchise Leaders Forum. My name is Marya, and I'm President for Franchise India. I've joined today with two very esteemed guests, Mr. Zwisler from Lathrop GPM, and Gaurav Marya, my elder brother and Chairman Franchise India. Welcome, gentlemen, for this special edition where we discuss on impact of COVID as well as what's happening in franchising in international scene, and particularly the focus this time is US. That's a bit about Mr. Zwisler. With 35-year plus experience, he is one of the go-to person, an elite lawyer who brings very vast experience in business of franchising and international franchising. And this is a bit about him again. And he's going to give us an insight in the business, what's happening in US and rest of the world. So before, without much ado, I would request Carl to sort of take on and tell us a little more about what's happening. Welcome, Carl.
Thank you, Sachin. And hello, everybody. It's nice to see you or be with you this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you. I'd like to give you some insights that I have developed from working with clients and franchisors around the world. I am a franchise lawyer, and so the perspective that I'm bringing to you is one that I have derived from advising franchisors and master franchisees, suppliers, both in the United States and around the world. My first thought about COVID and the effect on franchising is that many franchise systems will not survive this pandemic. And those that do must be in an industry that is either minimally or positively affected by the pandemic. And by that, I mean that they are able to stay open and continue to maintain income for as long as is necessary to stay afloat. And I mean that they may be in businesses such as home health care or food delivery, which are seeing tremendous growth as a result of the pandemic. I also think that systems that can take advantage of new and different opportunities that were not previously thought to be important are also going to survive the pandemic. But if you look at the challenges that we're all facing right now with shutdowns, people hospitalized, getting infected, confronting death, I think franchising is uniquely positioned to help businesses survive in this type of environment. So think about franchising and how it started. A company founder and its leadership develop a business that achieves uncommonly good results, much better than the others. They develop a competitive advantage, and they are willing to share that with other people, franchisees, in exchange for payments. Think about a franchisee. A franchisee is a business person who wants to share in that competitive advantage. They want to avoid making the mistakes and spending the resources that would be necessary to get to the same point in the business cycle that a franchise could bring them as they get started. So franchising is unique because it's based upon sharing know-how and experience. The best franchisors are leaders who take advantage of both their own experience and the experience and the insights that are provided by their franchisees as they confront challenges. Well, in our pandemic environment, leadership, communication, and adaptation are not just the keys to success, they are in many cases required for survival. Franchising is global in its scope, as we all know, but predominantly franchising is practiced at a local level. And just as COVID infection rates have soared and then dropped in different locations and at different times, and local and national governments have imposed different types of responses to it, franchisors and franchisees have also had to respond at a local level. A global franchisor or a national franchisor cannot consistently apply the same standards to franchisees in different localities that are facing different problems. So this has been a challenge, but it's also been an opportunity for franchisors. And we should be able to take advantage of the knowledge gained from problems that have existed in one place or another as they emerge in different places around the globe. And that's one of the benefits that franchising provides. As I said a minute ago, I'm a lawyer, a franchise lawyer. I am a member of a team of more than 30 franchise lawyers and paralegals. I work in the Watergate in Washington, D.C. And our offices of Lathrop GPM are in 14 cities around the United States. We have one of the largest franchise law practices in the world, and we work with global franchisors, master franchisees, and suppliers in both providing advice, drafting agreements, mergers and acquisitions, international expansion. I spend a substantial amount of my time on cross-border transactions, which I think may be one of the reasons I've been asked to participate in this program. So when we are advising our clients, we're advising them based upon the problems they bring to us. I know you may never have thought about this, but nobody calls a lawyer to tell them things are going well. They always call when they have a problem. And unless you're working on a particular problem, you don't know when the phone rings and you pick it up what the problem is and what it is you're going to be asked to do. But we get similar types of problems when we specialize in franchising, and we've been seeing recurring problems that franchisors and franchisees have had since the inception of COVID. Let's go through some of those because I think you're facing those in India, and I think people are going to be facing them all over the world if they haven't already been facing them for the last 6 months. First of all, business shutdowns, or only allowing essential businesses to stay open. That was the first phase that we encountered in the United States. And of course, franchisees and franchisors really didn't know what to do. I mean, at the outset, if the government says you're shut down, you're shut down. But if you're an essential business and you had to stay open, then that raised a whole series of questions about how do you protect your employees? How do you protect your customers? What do you do if your employee or one of your employees or more is infected, or that you know that a customer has been infected? We've been concerned about restrictions on the number of customers that may enter into a business or a store or be in a public place. We have social distancing requirements. Restaurants are beginning to open around where I live in Washington, D.C., that the tables have to be 6 feet apart, and most of the dining is supposed to occur outside. How can a restaurant that was hoping to have 95% occupancy in order to stay afloat work when only 1/3 of the seats can be available at any one time? So it's been a challenge operationally, but it's also been a challenge to the standards that franchisors have set for their operations and what they've advertised in the past. We found restrictions on providing personal services, such as salons, massage studios, barber shops, fitness centers. Many of these businesses have been shut down for months and are only beginning to reopen in certain places. Will those businesses survive, or what have they done to try to maintain contact with their customers and source of income? We've had quarantine and shelter-in-place restrictions. We've had it in many places in the US. They've had it in Paris, where people can't even go out into the street unless they have some justifiable reason. That's had a totally adverse impact on many businesses. We've seen travel restrictions. Being from the United States, where we have done such a stellar job of controlling COVID, virtually no other country wants us to come there until the situation is resolved. I happen to have a sister-in-law who came to visit us and to see a doctor who was a specialist, and she has not been able to return to Canada because she's married to a Canadian, but she's a US citizen. So she's been living with us, separated from her family for 6 months. It's just another consequence of this that affects business all the way around. So let's look at some of the more specific challenges that arise from the circumstances that I've kind of brushed over. Like one, if a business could not open, must a franchisee still pay minimum royalty fees or make advertising contributions? Must they pay rent? Do they have to keep on, the employees or a minimum number of employees that the franchisor may specify in the manual? How should businesses react when one of the employees has become infected? What are the legal obligations that they have to their other employees and to their customers? Regardless of that, what if employees simply say, I'm not coming to work because I'm afraid I'm going to be infected? And what duty does a franchisee or a franchisor have under those circumstances? What kind of advice or direction can or should a franchisor provide under those circumstances? In the US, we have been concerned, as they have been in Australia and several other places over the last couple of years, with what we call joint employer liability, which means is if a franchisor provides direction over employment practices, the franchisor may be liable for violation of employment laws. So if a franchisor is telling franchisees how to behave in certain circumstances, is the franchisor at risk of being liable for the problems that the franchisee has created? What about force majeure clauses? This is one of the first issues that came up as COVID was becoming prominent. And a force majeure is a legal concept that says if there is an act of God or something beyond the anticipation and control of the parties, that performance of the contractual obligation can be suspended for the duration of the force majeure. So many people have misunderstood this. They think it's call it a get out of jail free card. If there's a force majeure, you don't have to pay. But in fact, a force majeure clause is something that in most countries, especially in common law countries such as India and the United States, where it's a creature of contract. So you have to look exactly at the contract and what does the contract say? And normally the contract says if you provide notice to the other party and the actual type of force majeure event is specified in the contract, then your duty to perform is suspended, where your duty is relaxed as specified in the agreement. Many agreements do not have force majeure clauses. So when the government says that your business is shut down, everybody must shelter in place, they can't go to work, do you have an obligation to pay rent for that space that you can't occupy? Well, we've seen litigation over that, and the landlords are saying, wait a minute, I didn't say you couldn't come here. You've got your equipment and you've got your furnishings and you've got your inventory in this place. I can't rent it to somebody else. Of course you have to pay rent, and I didn't excuse it. So we're seeing a range of arguments relating to force majeure clauses. In the United States, as in many other countries, governments have come up with programs of economic aid to businesses and to employees. The first set of those proposals originated at our US federal government, and they provided loans to small businesses, and they forgave the principal of those loans, or up to a certain percentage of the principal, if the borrower used it to pay employees. So if you kept your employees on the payroll, then the government was essentially going to give you money to make payroll payments for a certain period of time. But the program was rolled out so quickly that, almost in a matter of 10 days, that the bureaucracy was still printing the regulations, 2 hours before it went into effect, and they counted on banks to issue the loans. And of course, the banks weren't sure what the government requirements were. People were signing their loan applications, and there remains considerable concern about whether they have actually, in some cases, really qualified for the loans, and if they don't, they're subject to criminal prosecution. So it's another issue for lawyers and for franchisors. Anyway, there are just one or two others that I will mention. In international franchising, we usually see area development agreements or master franchise agreements, and those are always accompanied with a development schedule. Franchisee must open a required number of locations within a certain period of time. So what has been the effect of that on franchising? Well, I think by and large, most development is not proceeding at the pace that's prescribed by development schedules. So what we have seen with respect to development schedules and with payment obligations, advertising obligations, operating under different standards from what is normal, is we've seen the need for communication and negotiation. And we've seen the need to do that on a localized basis because situations are different. I think we all should understand that a franchisor only has franchisees because it's a way to generate profit and a profitable business. A franchisor is not going to terminate area developers because they can't develop in a pandemic. They have no interest in cutting off their sources of revenue. They don't want to terminate franchisees who can't pay royalties or full royalties or can't operate fully if there's a bona fide reason for it. But these are challenges that we are all facing. So happy to answer questions about those, but these are just some of the major issues that we see from our offices in the US.
Very nice, Carl. I mean, I think very, very helpful. It was a very good insight, and it shows about your experience and the work you've done in the industry, and we have a highest regard for your contribution there. So I'll maybe start with picking up a few questions, while you rightly said on franchising, because of nature of being in contracts, and you have all this pandemic would disturb a lot of businesses and a lot of relationships, and relationships would get deeply affected because the obligations that both the franchisor end and franchisee end would not be able to, because of the given circumstances, not be able to do. So what kind of major changes you are seeing, and some best practices which you are seeing which is happening in the industry, especially how franchisors are reacting towards accommodating and helping out and softening their obligations and the franchisee obligations, and what we call the firm and flexible rule of franchising, which means that you have firm on few things which you cannot negotiate, and flexible on few things you can do that. Are you seeing that that's already started, or would you see in coming months a lot of that would happen? And that's one question. And second question I would like to really begin is, this force majeure. I would like your answer on that, because this is something which is happening worldwide. People are becoming opportunists to use force majeure as a situation, and some are very genuinely using because they don't understand where they're heading, and they want like to maybe stop loss at a situation and not go further for their extended. So these two questions from my side to begin with, you, Carl.
Sure. Well, I think as I alluded to at the outset, one of the strengths of franchising is the communication. Franchising has to be adaptable. And what we have seen, and at least from my perspective, we're not just starting to deal with COVID. We've been living it. It seems like, for 6 months. I don't know how long it's been, but so at the outset, there's communication between franchisees and franchisors on a regular basis. We've seen to talk about how to respond to these different issues. I mean, when the first closures started, nobody knew what to do, and franchisors and franchisees had to be nimble. In our experience, they've had franchise advisory councils or groups of franchisees communicating with the franchisors to try to develop methods of responding. You know, when these government programs for financing came up, franchisors and the International Franchise Association were trying to make sure that franchises could qualify to receive the payments, and they did that. But providing advice about how to qualify, what forms to use. Franchisors and communicating with their franchisees have been, a very valid source of information, and we've seen it for years, not just in the COVID environment, where franchisees have one experience and it's a favorable experience. They can explain how they have developed a system of delivery or picking up food from their restaurant, or what technology they can adapt to quickly enable them to provide some kind of business. I've talked with franchisors that were in the cleaning business or janitorial business, and their focus is suddenly on sanitization and health, and how do you make a business or a restaurant clean enough so that employees and customers feel comfortable. So they're looking at what are the service offerings that they're providing that are advantageous. I have a client who's in the promotional products business. So if you have a pen that has the name of your company on it, that would be a promotional product. But some of them have thought, well, we can make these plastic shields that you can use to protect the workers at the checkout stand, or you can put them in schools or in offices between cubicles, or some other ways to protect people. And their business has been flourishing because they've got a new product line and a new service line that a customer at one point asked the franchisee, can you provide me with something like this? And suddenly it became a major product offering for the entire business. So we've seen a lot of flexibility and a lot of adaptation. And I think we're going to continue to have to see it, because if the cycle turns and people are sick and tired of ordering takeout food and eating at home, they may want to go to restaurants. And so maybe some of this adaptation won't be quite as important, a year and a half from now as it is now, but that's a big change. On the question of force majeure, it's very fact specific. I've had a client call me and say, what do we do? We've got 3 franchisees. This is a small chain. They were in the in-home care business, which means they send caregivers to take care of people who are sick, usually older, who can't take care of themselves. And their business, by and large, has been very positively impacted by COVID, because nobody wants to send their parents to a long-term care facility where they had the highest infection rates, of anywhere, other than maybe a prison. So that business was kind of thriving, but the client called us and said, we got 3 guys and they don't want to pay royalties. I said, well, what's the problem? Well, one of them says his sales are down. That's strange. The business should be up, right? Another one is about the same. And the third one is 30% ahead of where he was the previous month. But they all want royalty relief. Why do I raise this? Because everybody wants royalty relief. Nobody wants to pay money if they don't have to. But the response of the franchisor has to be individualized, or at least you have to have categories and say, you've got to demonstrate to me, first of all, that there's really a problem. Demonstrate that there's a problem that we could resolve by providing royalty relief. And oh, by the way, it's not going to be forgiveness. We need royalties in order to maintain our business and provide services to you. So you can say it's a force majeure. In this particular contract, there was no force majeure clause. And in many franchise agreements, there are not. And so it was a question of negotiating with the franchisee, who are deciding whether to negotiate with the franchisee who wasn't doing well, or whether he was just so incompetent that it didn't make any sense, and to, cut him loose. So in many cases, it's not just a global, restatement of royalties. It's trying to understand the unique conditions of different franchisees in different situations, and dealing with them. Does that help answer your question?
Very. Sachin, over to you for your question.
Yeah, so I have two questions, quite linked. One is about your remark about the sustainability of the business, and this, franchising usually have a very high, especially in US, we see a great probability of business being successful if it's franchised, but this is a forced situation wherein sustainability is on a big question mark. And you mentioned that a lot of businesses may not be able to sustain both at the franchisee fraternity as well as the franchisor fraternity. I want you to elaborate on that. Second point I want to make is that historically franchising has seen an emergence of a very large community getting into forced entrepreneurship through franchising, because franchising is a kind of a fine balance between jobs and self-startups. So it's a fine balance. And when it comes to forced entrepreneurship, a lot of professionals moving in franchising, moving in entrepreneurship or starting a business, franchising comes handy as an opportunity. So you see a kind of a spike in new franchisees coming on board. These are my two questions.
In terms of sustainability, again, I'm not giving legal advice, not that I necessarily was before, but if you look at the lodging industry, the hotel industry, at least in the United States, they've had occupancy rates of like 3 to 5%. Historically, they're trying to maintain 90% or above in order to be profitable. How long can you afford to pay the rent or whatever, or pay your employees or do whatever you need to maintain the building before it doesn't make any sense to continue to take on debt and make payments? And the longer the travel industry is closed down, I think the more we're going to see more hotels in particular and travel related businesses close. I just think, well, eventually it will come back. I don't think a lot of people have the resources to ride it out. So that's, one perspective. The largest car rental company in the world, Hertz, is in Chapter 11 because nobody or very few people are renting cars. They're not traveling. So their business is way down. Think about if the massage studios. I mean, how do you maintain social distancing with a masseuse or masseur? You don't. And even when government allows those to open, many of us are reluctant to take the chance and risk our health. So I see some of those industries, having real problems. On the other hand, we did see in the hotel industry when New York was at the nadir of its COVID problems, that they were opening up some hotels to healthcare workers who had flown in from other places in the country. And so they were providing a service and also, trying to take advantage of the problem. That's a short-term fix, maybe it works. But I just think the longer that businesses are forced to go without adequate revenues, the more of them are not going to be able to survive, despite all of the efforts of the government. I think it's very important for all governments to continue to provide supports if they want to have the economy able to rebound when we can recover from the virus or when we have vaccines that are going to be effective. You asked about entrepreneurship and new franchises. I do see reports every day of new franchises opening And maybe the reason I see them is because I used to see them all the time, but they're much more prominent because we don't see as many as we used to. I have not seen franchise sales continuing at the same pace they were 6 months ago. I don't think there's any question but that franchise sales have been down. Although in the United States, in order to sell franchises in 13 states, a franchisor must register its franchise with a government agency. And we have to provide the franchise agreement, a franchise disclosure document, and franchisor's financial statements. They're reviewed and approved, and they have to be approved every year. The number of franchise registration applications and renewal applications has been pretty consistent from what the state regulators have told us. And so that part of our business has continued. But we have seen concern among the regulators about what's in the franchise disclosure documents, in particular, statements about earnings. And many franchisors use historical information. So they would have information that said, in 2019, our average monthly store revenue was $100,000. And we'll just be simple. And the regulators are now saying, well, if that has materially changed in 2020, you can't just say that in your franchise disclosure document. You have to amend it and say something about 2020. Well, of course, that information is so incomplete, it's very difficult for franchisors to comply with. So if half of your outlets were closed for 3 months, or were subject to only 50% operation, they were only doing the takeout and delivery if they're a restaurant, those results are really different. So the regulatory climate has changed, and franchisors are not providing financial information to prospective franchisees now like they were before. And I suspect that's just going to make franchise sales even more difficult. I think people will be entrepreneurial. I mean, there are so many people who are out of work. Our unemployment rate is growing here in the United States. And so often when people are unemployed, if they have the resources, they look to invest in a business. That may happen, and I just haven't seen it reported yet.
Absolutely. And Carl, we are seeing in India big demand rise because of this unemployment, because India, unfortunately, is still a developing country, and we don't have a support from government for businesses or for employment, especially white-collar jobs. And unfortunately, there is also a big job loss in a country as large in India. But we see always, whenever this situation happens, this is very exceptional times, but micro franchising starts rising. People start doing small businesses and small investment opportunities, and so that's really been a very, very high demand, and especially at our company we're seeing that. So now another very important question I want to really take your mind on, because you have an opportunity for you to really, because you've done business in cross-border and cross structure, and you're one of the few specialists actually on understanding multi-markets situations, because I have dealt personally with a lot of US firms where they are very familiar about the US federal laws for franchising and other things, but they don't understand so much of cross-border understanding. So give us a little insight on some of your experiences on the cross-border agreements, and especially if you've done work on the British contract law, because India follows the same law. It's very old, and how do you see that in some countries you've seen this evolving? And a lot of times we say, is it a good thing to have a regulation, or over-regulated markets have problem? There are very few markets in the world like US and Australia and Malaysia and places of that nature where there's special law for franchising, and most of the other markets run on a principal contract law. So a little bit on insight on how does this differs, and what is advantage on each side and disadvantage on each side.
Well, clearly the United States was the first to develop franchise sales law. And as we were talking about the growth of entrepreneurship or mini franchisors in India, I was struck by the fact that because of our regulatory system, you really can't do that in the United States. If you want to start a franchise, you have to have the franchise agreement, franchise disclosure document, audited financial statement. You've got to develop operations manuals. In many states, you have to get registered or approved. You need to protect your trademarks. So you're probably looking at a minimum investment just to handle the franchise, legal work of $30,000 to $50,000. And there are a lot of companies that will not franchise because they can't afford it. And if they can't afford $50,000, they probably can't afford to franchise anyway. But because they do need capital, notwithstanding what they often think. In terms of how things have changed, across borders, we were talking about the common law countries based on English law, and the freedom of contract, I think, makes franchising much easier. I mean, I know there have been some people who have proposed developing a franchise regulatory scheme in India in the past, thinking it would help franchising. I'm not one of those. I think that by and large, unless there is a serious problem, unless people are getting defrauded, unless there is evidence that fraud or misrepresentation is rampant, I think the remedy is sometimes much worse than the disease in this case. But there are other issues dealing with franchising in every country. I mean, you certainly have a number of them in India that I don't have to tell you about because you live with them every day, just as we have them here. I think I don't see any particular difference from a legal perspective of how franchises are coping with COVID. I mean, I have been involved in a presentation a few weeks ago with franchisors in North Africa. And one of the problems that they were experiencing was that sources of supply were closed down because of COVID. They just couldn't get the regular supplies that they got from other places, and they had to get regulatory approvals in order to import alternative products, and that had slowed their operations. That's been a challenge anywhere. In the United States, we couldn't get toilet paper, believe it or not. People were hoarding it, and you could not find it in a supermarket anywhere for almost a month. People were posting on their websites where stores that had toilet paper available. So there can be shortages of supplies that has affected franchising. But from the legal system perspective, I haven't seen one that's any better or worse than others. And we've seen new franchise laws adopted in the last 6 months. In Malaysia, there was an amendment. In Saudi Arabia, a new comprehensive franchise law. There's one that's just going into effect in the Netherlands. In Thailand, changes in South Korea and in Indonesia. So the regulators are not taking the time off, but I don't think that's really COVID related.
And also, would you think that there would be, just going on the cross-border business, there would be now a lot of American companies, and America was always ahead of the curve in terms of looking at international expansion. It's now so happened. Is it going to open up more now? You see more cross-border because countries which are relatively less impacted, or countries which would have more potential to survive and a future, and I think the people would divide their risk and go into multi-markets rather than focus on one market?
Gaurav, companies were doing that before COVID. The International Franchise Association surveyed its members 2 or 3 years ago, and at least 30% of all U.S. franchisors who responded to the survey were already franchising internationally, and as many as 70% were interested in international franchising in the foreseeable future. One of the reasons to do that was to diversify risks and opportunities in case of, economic problems in one part of the world or another. I don't think anybody was anticipating a pandemic when this issue arose. One of the real challenges of international franchising are travel restrictions, in addition to supply. So in order to provide training, usually it's been in-person training. When you're recruiting international franchisees, best practice is that you want to have the international franchisee come to the franchisor's headquarters and get to know the people who are going to be working with the international franchisee prospect, and the franchisor personnel want to go and meet the prospective franchisee and their teams to understand what they are really like, because it's a relationship built on trust and long-term understanding. That can't do that right now. There are, many people have been creative doing what we're doing right now. I mean, a year ago, could we have even carried on this kind of conversation that we're having today? Maybe, but certainly not 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, technology is enabling us to do all kinds of things that we never thought possible only a few years ago. So I do see international franchising rebounding, but until the travel restrictions are changed, that's going to be a problem. I can tell you, when I saw Sachin at the IFA convention in February, later that day, I had dinner with the head of international development for CKE Enterprises, which is Hardee's and Carl's Jr. restaurants, which is fairly significant, about number 3 or number 4 in terms of size of hamburger restaurants in the US. And 3 weeks later, I got an email from him saying that he'd been furloughed. He was telling me he's getting ready to take another round the world trip. So he's back to work now, but I mean, it's just emblematic of what's happened with franchising. Josh Marin, who has been heading up the IFA's international program for 10 years, furloughed, out of work. They didn't think that was enough revenue generation for IFA to be able to maintain during the pandemic. So while international development is important, it's not necessarily top of mind when people are trying to conserve cash and generate the fastest, best returns on their investment. I think people see it more as a long-term investment rather than as an immediate return, and rightfully so.
Sure. Thank you. That was very honest insight on what's happening. At this point, I would also want to take a few questions from the audience. We have a question from Anil Dev. He's asked a few questions, but one of the questions that we are taking is that, how are you suggesting on the license fee or royalties or overheads which franchisees are experiencing? So what's your I know we spoke about this, and I'm going to come to Gaurav also on this point, is that how are you advising your customers? Nobody knows exactly what's the right answer here, but what are your advice to your customers on how to deal with requests coming in from franchisees, whether honest or otherwise, about relaxations on royalties and franchise fees?
Well, first of all, I think you take it on a case-by-case basis, and the first question is, should you relax the fees? Most franchise royalties are percentage based. So if you got no income, you got no royalties there too. So if that's perspective, then only if you have minimum royalties should you really be concerned. And if a franchisor is providing services to a franchisee, should it be providing services for nothing? The answer, of course, is no, from a franchisor's perspective. So we're looking at the long term. Many franchisors have provided royalty forgiveness or royalty reduction, or They have deferred collection of royalties until sometime in the future. When we have advised franchisors about that, we said, and that's true of any change to the operating system in a franchise, put it in writing. If it's not already authorized in the franchise agreement, get in writing exactly how you're modifying operations or payment obligations. Secondly, we've recommended franchisors get a release, a general release from franchisees saying, as a condition of my giving you this concession, you agree not to sue me, for anything that's happened before this date. Some franchisees think that's too aggressive and it's not fair. But we recommend that franchisors have to be concerned about their own well-being, and why should they give away money that they don't have to give away without getting something back in exchange for it. So, and then there's a question of need too, as I explained with the lower even and better sales volume situation. You don't necessarily have to give the same type of concessions or change the arrangements for all franchisees everywhere. The situations really differ. And I think this is part of communication. What is it that, why can't the franchisee pay? Now, if their business is closed down, I think they have a very good argument saying, you really can't expect me to pay while it's closed down. And I think most franchisors, not necessarily all, are going to make some kind of concession in those cases. But if the franchisee is operational and generating revenue, then why shouldn't the franchisor continue to get paid? And I point out I represent franchisors, not franchisees, so that may have something to do with my approach to this.
That's right. I'm sure a lot of franchises would be very happy to see your viewpoint and maybe record this and pass it on to their network, your opinion. And which you very rightly said, because fundamentally you're right. This is how do you really run a system? It's proportionate to the sport you get, and if your sport has to be given, then the royalties have to be paid. The only thing which you wisely advise is that there has to be a case-by-case discussion. If it is what stage the business is and what industry is impacted. We divide this into what I call low impact, mid impact, and a deep impact industries. And if you have a deep impact, obviously the problem is not so much of royalties, is about sustainability and cash flows and how do you really address that problem. And we are doing a lot of work in India and on the consolidation side, because I feel, and I will park again a question to you. Whenever this kind of situations happen, there are some players better than the other ones, and the consolidation start happening. And I personally feel that your office would become even more busier doing a lot of M&A work in 2021, especially because this year would go in confusion. And as the people will start opening up businesses and come to reality, and then they would see their financial balance sheets and understand they run out of cash, and cash generation would also become difficult, because both the equity side and the debt side would not be attractive to the balance sheets which have been run down, right? So at that stage, the option would be M&A, and I feel that their quality assets always there, and there would be always quality buyers out there. So what do you see on the M&A side? What is happening on the consolidation side?
Well, we do quite a bit of franchising M&A work, and it slowed, considerably in March or maybe April. I think everybody was kind of afraid of what was going on, and people had signed contracts, and they were certainly looking at force majeure clauses then if they were investing in a business that was shut down. And there were some cases that arose out of that. But since then, the deal flow has improved. And I agree with your observation. I mean, there are a lot of good companies that just don't have adequate cash for survival. And I think we are going to see a lot more M&A. We're obviously going to see a lot more bankruptcy work. In preparing my thoughts, for today, one of the things that occurred to me is, I've been through more than one recession in my life, and I have, seen, people in very, very bad situations financially. And I think people need to be honest with themselves and with their investors. In some cases, this is not going to work out. So why should you continue to pile on debt and not sleep at night because you're so concerned about the business? A lot of smart people are going to do what Donald Trump did and, go into reorganization with the business or liquidation. And if that's the case, and not spend good money after bad and, ruin their mental health as a result of it. And that's an unfortunate fact of life, but our bankruptcy practice and all bankruptcy practices are going to pick up through this as well, unfortunately.
Yes. So it's a good time for law firms. Good respectable law firms would get very, very busy because from dispute management to future restructuring advice to M&A to bankruptcy, I think there's a lot coming on your plate, and this would be opening up of new session. And I think experienced people like you would be able to give a lot of wisdom to businesses which sometimes not have direct answers, and they look at answers from you directly. So Sachin, over to you. Before we'll be coming close to our closing structure. So you want to pick up some questions and some notes from your side?
Yeah, one last question, which I think has been consistent in all discussions, has been some categories, which you see, and some business models which are emerging purely out of code.
I'm sorry, you broke up. I didn't hear the last sentence.
So some categories which you feel are still something that one would want to get into as a franchisee, and some of the business models which you are seeing now.
Well, I mean, clearly, in-home healthcare is a place where I would want to be. I don't think I would want to invest in long-term healthcare facilities right now, although that may be an opportunity for acquisition or consolidation going forward. I mean, with the aging of the world's population, that's been a very good and growing business model, but it's been especially good right now. Anybody who's involved in the delivery business, I mean, Pizza Hut was taking on thousands of employees. We have clients in the in-home healthcare business who are trying to hire 100 employees a month, and that's not a huge business. I mean, we've seen anybody that's related to online businesses have done extremely well. In the United States, we didn't have very much delivery from grocery stores. I mean, everybody went in person. Since COVID, there have been several companies that have sprung up who specialize in shopping and delivering groceries to people, so they don't have to leave their homes. I mean, that is an emerging area. I think probably there are educational opportunity in the educational sectors where you're providing online training or teaching to students or educational support. I mean, we're going to have children who may have been away from regular school for maybe as much as 2 years, and everybody, the parents in particular, are concerned about whether they're going to fall behind their counterparts, or whether they're going to be employable, whether they're going to get into university, etc. So I think the companies that are providing these online educational opportunities are going to be doing well. Janitorial businesses, to the extent that they are able to provide, some comfort and sense of cleanliness and to deal with COVID, they're certainly having an uptick in their business. I mean, there's some good things that are coming out of all of it. We've seen in the restaurant industry here where things have slowed, particularly for the eat-in sector, that companies are now experimenting with using the excess kitchen capacity to provide delivery services for another brand. So if you have brand A and you've been operating a brand A restaurant, you might agree to prepare meals for brand B and they would have an online presence, but all of the meal preparation would occur in Brand A's restaurant. So it's another income opportunity, and people are, being creative in application of what they already know.
Absolutely. I think this is a very interesting innovations are coming from the pressures of slowdown and all that other things. So people are innovating and becoming creative to find new opportunities. But you're right, absolutely. There are a lot of industries still out there which are positively impacted and would also be seeing a lot of growth. Sachin, your remarks on?
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Gaurav. I think it's been a wonderful session. We are just about 3 minutes away from closing down. So your last remarks and your closing remarks.
Well, let me see if I have some closing remarks. I think the real challenge to all of us right now is, as we enter a reopening phase, if we are there, and we are in some places in the US, and then we're in a reclosing phase in others. But health and safety are paramount. So nobody wants to get infected. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to be in a position where their health and safety is threatened. So what are franchisees and franchisors to do? First thing is to understand government advice. Unfortunately, in this country, we have inconsistent advice, or sometimes political leaders that are contradicting the scientific advice. But we need to know what that is, keep track of it, and follow it. And franchisors can play a critical role in making sure that their franchisees understand what the government guidelines are, at least at the national level. Franchisees are going to have to deal with it on their own and on a local or statewide level or national level if it's a global franchise. Franchisors should consult with counsel if they want to adopt something, a standard, health and safety standard that is different from what the government prescribes or what's known as best practices. Why? Well, you may want to say we're safer. We take more steps to protect our customers, than brand X. Well, the challenge with that is if you announce it, you have to be prepared to enforce it. And if you prepare to enforce it, that may mean litigation, but you also have to know that it is a sound standard and it's effective, and that you are not going to unnecessarily expose your franchisees or the franchisor itself to claims that they were using a bogus standard and they really weren't providing adequate safety and health for their employees and for their customers. Franchisors and franchisees should consult with their insurance carriers if they are adopting new health and safety standards. Is that covered under their insurance policies? They want to make sure that there's an alignment and they're not doing something that would risk exposure to all kinds of claims for which they couldn't have insurance coverage. And finally, as you're going through this, bad things are going to happen. They're happening right now, and regardless of how well we plan, sometimes things go wrong. So as we adopt health and safety strategies, I think it's time to also consult with our public relations teams and develop an action plan as to how we will respond when and if something goes wrong. Because one or two outbreaks of infection in some business somewhere can have a catastrophic impact on that brand, wherever it is. So not only must we have the standards, but we must be prepared for the likely problem that will arise when something happens, when something bad happens. So on that happy note, those are my concluding remarks.
Very well said. I think it's a very good guidance and very, very helpful for our audience in India, because I think they needed a lot of, especially our franchise community. Franchise India has about 9,000 active franchise systems in India, which work with us. And so they would, this through our Facebook and everything, this message of yours would reach it. I think it will be very, very helpful. And I know a lot of people are also seeking advice when they're looking at taking over an international master franchise. My suggestion would be that reach out to Carl's office and seek a good advice whenever you're looking to that, because they represent both sides. If you're even looking at some advice on buying a master, because it's a very big decision, and sometimes you're getting into a contract for 30 years, and you need to really forecast. The world changes every 6 months these days, so 30 years is a very, very long period, and so you need to really have a very strong and advice, and that's why we reached out to his office, and we're trying to pass more and more benefit. And also, I think generally, if you are, some of the companies also in India, Carl, just to tell you, also are looking to enter US. Very few brands which have ability to either address the large Indian diaspora which lives in US, or otherwise they are looking for actively franchising. So we're working with them also. So this would have been a very, very good learning structure, and they can obviously reach out to your offices or for a later legal advice or any kind of update on that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking time out and addressing our audience. And over to you, Sachin, for your thank you notes.
Thank you very much, Carl, Gaurav, Carl, especially because I know it's early and you accepted to join at a short notice. So really appreciate and what you with your past experience, and especially in a matured market like US, it was a very interesting session. And thank you, everyone. We look forward to our next week session with another expert. And be safe, and I'll see you soon. Thank you very much, Jeff.